concert hall, and there are two men that were going to speak. And the first gentleman got up, and they were both going to recite the 23rd Psalm. And the first man that got up to share the psalm was a published orator, and he was trained in speech technique and drama, and he recites the psalm with power, and the audience desires an encore because they just want to hear his voice again. And then the next man that gets up, and he's an older fella, and he simply begins to recite and repeat the same words. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But when he finishes, there's no sound that's coming from the large crowd. Instead, the people sit in deep silence. And many even begin to pray silently. And after he sits down, the younger gentleman, the more polished speaker, gets back up and he says, I have a confession to make today. There is a huge difference between myself and my older friend here. I know the psalm, but he knows the shepherd. Church, we're in a month-long series entitled, I Am. And we believe that Jesus is who he said he was. He is the bread to feed upon, the light to follow, the door to enter, the shepherd to guide, the resurrection upon which to wait, the way of salvation to trust, and the vine in which to abide. But one of the things that's most interesting when Jesus declares these I am statements throughout all the scriptures, throughout the book of John, he does it in a quiet but confident and assured way. And so today we focus on I am the good shepherd. And again, these words, when the people, the Jewish people, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all the religious leaders, if they would hear these words from Jesus, it would hearken them back to familiar words from their ancestors. Ezekiel Chapter 34, verses 11 and 12 says, For this is what the sovereign Lord says, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so will I look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they are scattered on the day of clouds and darkness. He also says in Psalm 80, verse 1, Hear us, shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock. People in Isaiah 56, 9 through 11 says, Come all you beasts of the field, come and devour all your beasts of the forest. Israel's watchmen are blind. They lack knowledge. They are all mute dogs. They cannot bark. They lie around and dream. They love to sleep. They are dogs with mighty appetites. They never have enough. They are shepherds who lack understanding. There is a contrast here. There is a contrast on the one half where God is saying, listen, I am the shepherd. But there are other people that are declaring themselves to be shepherds, and they are basically lacking understanding. They are truly not shepherds. And so in this situation we find ourselves in John chapter 10. By this point in John, the people are so upset with what Jesus is declaring. They're so upset with how he's declaring the truth that he is God. I am God, and all these declarations, all these I am statements. They have by this point tried to even kill him 3 times. The rejection is continuing. But Jesus is continuing to share this I am statement. And so today we find ourselves in John chapter 10. John chapter 10. But let me just give you a little background. John chapter 9, Jesus is having a conversation with his disciples, and they come upon a blind man, a man who'd been blind from birth, and the disciples asked Jesus a question. They said, listen, this gentleman right here, this man who's blind, was it he or his parents that sinned in order for him to become blind? And Jesus responds, neither he nor his parents have sinned. This has occurred that the power of God might be demonstrated. And what Jesus does is he spits on the ground and he makes a mud facial and he puts it on the guy's eyes and he says, go into the river and wash. And the man is then healed of his blindness. And then he runs into the temple and he wants to tell everybody about how this Jesus guy healed him. And the people in the temple are just so annoyed by Jesus. Not another Jesus story. Not another example of his power. Not another example that he truly is God. And so they get so frustrated, they kick the man out of the temple. And on the way out, he runs back into Jesus and they have this conversation. And upon the completion of that conversation, Jesus decides to again share a message with all those who are around him. There's really no gap between John 9 and John 10. They're still the same people, the same situations. And Jesus begins to teach. And we pick up the story in John chapter 10, verse 1. And this is 21 verses, so stay with me. It'll be on the screen. But I want us to read it in full in order to get the full context. I tell you the truth. The man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Go figure, right? Verse 7, therefore Jesus said again, I tell you the truth. I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever come before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one can take it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. Church, I want to tell you about the Good Shepherd today. Now, the reason why shepherd is a theme is because in the time and space where we find ourselves in the story of John chapter 10, shepherds were a major part of the Judean culture. There is a main plateau in Israel, and it's basically 37 miles wide and really 16 or 17 miles long, 37 miles long, and 16 to 17 miles wide, and really it's very, very rocky. And so there's really not much agriculture that goes on to it. And so it gets very easily acclimated to become a pasture and basically for sheep. And so that is why in this time, in this space, the shepherding industry is huge. But the life of the shepherd is basically longing to care for his sheep, finding a place, a pasture, protecting them from severe terrain and other animals and thieves. Shepherds were constantly on guard, had fearless courage, they had patience, and they loved their flocks. They simply weren't just out there watching them graze. They were on guard constantly. And one of the things that we need to realize that in this passage, it declares that there are these sheepfolds or sheep pens. In most communities back in that day, they had a community sheep pen. And so the shepherds would take their sheep out during the day to graze in different places, in different spots. But in the evening, they would all come back to these community sheep pens, and basically they would have them go in amongst all the other sheep, and there would be a hired hand there that would watch them for the night, and the shepherds would go home and sleep, and then in the morning they would come. And so there's this massive amount of sheep, and these sheep basically knew their name, and they knew the voice of their shepherd. And so there's hundreds and hundreds of sheep, but when their shepherd, the particular shepherd, shows up, and he calls them by name, and they hear his voice, some come to the gates, others don't pay any mind because that's not their shepherd. And so that's basically the context of what this culture understands about shepherds, sheep, and the sheepfold. So all of that context basically sets it up to understand the words of Jesus today. And so, church, I want to share 3 things with you, because that sounds like a really nice and tidy sermon, right? 3 things. But my 3 things will probably turn into like 38 by the time. This isn't my first rodeo. So here it is. Let's try real hard. Take notes, and if I go off pad, like yell or something. Here's the thing. I want you to know the Good Shepherd. Number one thing that I want you to know about the Good Shepherd is this. The Good Shepherd possesses the right credentials. One of the things that this passage opens up with in verses 1 through 6 is this contrast between there are some who come to the gate, who are the shepherd comes to the gate, and then there are these others, these thieves and these robbers who come over the wall, and they jump over the wall and they try to steal and destroy the sheep. And so basically what Jesus is setting himself up as is saying, listen, I have the credentials to come and call my sheep by name. I don't have to come in an inappropriate way. I don't have to come in the back door or over the wall. I have the credentials to come to the gates. I have the credentials to come and declare that these are my sheep. Have you ever thought about that? Really, who really is Jesus? Does he really have the credentials to do all the things that he declares? I mean, come on. Jesus makes some pretty ridiculous and extravagant claims about who he is, and this is just one of many. There was a math professor named Peter Stoner who wrote a book called Science Speaks, and basically what he did was he took 8 Old Testament prophecies. He took 8. Now there's many, many, many more than that, but he takes 8, and he says, what are the chances that any one man might have lived from the day of these prophecies down to the present time and have fulfilled all 8? What are the chances of one guy fulfilling all of these prophecies, 8 of them, between when they were given until the present day? And his answer was 10 to the 17th power. So that's 10 with 17 zeros. I wrote that on a piece of paper, but it was too, I was like... And so here's the thing. Hey, the one guy, he says this, and I don't know if this is true or not because I didn't go to Texas, but he says, if you took silver dollars, 10 to the 17th power, you would be able to put 2 feet high across the whole state of Texas. The entire state of Texas, 10 to the 17th power. That's how unique. That's how credentialed and how qualified Jesus was. And here's the thing. Here's the kicker. This guy was only doing 8. There were over 300 prophecy that Jesus confirmed and fulfilled when he came. 300. So Jesus definitely has the credentials to be the good shepherd, to be the one who can call his sheep. He was born of a virgin. He was born in Bethlehem. He came in the fullness of time. Upon his arrival, there was rage and hostility that arose. He was the right person, born at the right time, arriving on time, summoned and born at the right place. He has the credentials. And not only does he have the credentials, he has the calling. He has a voice that his people recognize. Verse 3, it talks about when the shepherd calls his sheep, listen. There's a voice recognition. He calls them by name. He knows his sheep personally. When his sheep hear his voice, everything changes for them. It awakens them from a sleep. Church, I want you to know that this is not just about John chapter 10. This is about you and I. We have a good shepherd who knows your name. He knows who you are. So not only does he have the credentials to be the good shepherd, he has the calling to be the good shepherd, and finally, he has the commands to be that good shepherd. Those who follow the good shepherd, because here's the thing, the good shepherd doesn't drive his sheep. He's not behind them, driving them. It tells us in the scriptures that he is leading them, he is going ahead of them, and they're following him, and he is going before them in all circumstances. One of the things that I pull from that is this idea that the good shepherd that I know is a good shepherd that goes first. The God that I know, the Jesus that I follow, is a Jesus who goes first, not someone who is trying to drive you to be and do things that he himself has never done. We do not have a dictator or a slave master that's pushing us into duty. We have an example, a leader, one who says, "Follow me, and I will protect you along the way, and I will lead you to green pastures." I pray that is the good shepherd that you follow today. That you follow a Jesus who is leading you, you are following, and you don't feel like he's a dictator and he's pushing you in to things that you don't want to do, to be someone you don't feel comfortable being, but that you're following an example, that you're inspired by his example. And that you realize that Jesus has been there as the good shepherd wherever you're going and whatever you're going through. He's been there and he knows what you're experiencing. Every step you'll ever take, he's already taken it. He's leading. He's out in front of you and I. So today I want you to check Jesus' credentials. Does he have the credentials in order to be your good shepherd? Can you trust him? The reason why sheep blindly follow is because they have no doubt that that's their shepherd. And see, when there is doubt and there's fear, there's unbelief. And so there's no unbelief in a sheep. Now, we call them stupid, we call them dumb, but basically what they're doing is they listen, they have total and complete trust and surrender to their shepherd. They know his voice, and they follow him wherever he takes them. Do you know that shepherd today? Is he credentialed in your life? Secondly, so that's number one. Number two, I told you I have to do three things, so this is number two. Church, Jesus possesses not only just the right credentials, he possesses the right character to be your good shepherd, to be the one that you follow. Last evening, we talked a little bit about this in verses 10 through 7. Jesus talks about being the door. Now, one of the things that's interesting, there's this concept of being the good shepherd, but then right in the middle of the sermon, Jesus kind of changes the analogy and changes the illustration, and he goes from being the shepherd to being the door, and it's like, how can you be the shepherd and the door? Here's how you can be the shepherd and the door, is because when they were out among the mountains and they weren't able to make it back to the sheep pens, they had to make a makeshift sheepfold. And the way that they created the door when they were out on long, far away trips, they would become that door. They would create out of stone and wood and whatever they could find, mud. They would create this against the hillside, and they would leave an opening where the sheep could come and go. But at night, to protect the sheep, they would then lay down in the doorway. They would lay down in the gap, and they then would become the door. And what Jesus is saying is, not only am I willing and credentialed enough for you to follow me, I have the character in order to be the door. It's interesting to me that there was only one door in the ark. There was only one door in the temple. There's only one door into God's family, into God's fold. There's only one way into deliverance. There's only one way into freedom. There's only one way for protection. And I know that sounds grossly intolerant and grossly narrow, but it is the truth. It is that which we've based our entire lives around. You know, I see people come to my door and we have different beliefs. And they want to share their beliefs with me, and I want to share my beliefs with them. And at the end of the conversation, inevitably, it gets to this point. It's a stalemate. And I literally have to tell them, listen, if you're right, then I had a good life. If I'm right, you're messed up. You know what I mean? Because here's the thing, if you're right and all of this is a bunch of baloney, if you're right and there's none of this matters, and basically we all just kind of, we're just basically lulled to sleep by all these beliefs, I've had a great life. But if you're wrong, if I'm right and you're wrong, man, I hope you have your suntan oil. Jesus has the right character. And how did I digress to that? Okay, get back on. Okay. Oh, I was telling you about one door. So there's only one way to deliverance, one way to freedom, one way to protection. You cannot enter the presence of God through any other door except through Christ. 1 Peter 2, 24 and 25 says this, He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sin and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but now you have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. Listen, church, in John chapter 10, verses 7 through 10, Jesus is saying, there is only one way to the Father, and it's through me. There's only one door that you can enter to have protection, to have salvation, to be rescued and protected, and it comes through me. And so not only does the Good Shepherd have the credentials for you to follow, the Good Shepherd has the character to save you. Now, I know that's kind of a churchy word, but I wonder if we might need to be a little bit more comfortable with the word and the phrase, I am saved. Because here's the thing, John chapter 10, verse 9. Let's look at it again. It's worth pausing here to look at it. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. The young punk preacher isn't making up this word. That's not just like the vogue, hey man, I go to that church where they get saved at that church. No, what this is saying, listen, if you come into a relationship with Jesus Christ, if you come through the gate, you will be saved. And you cannot be saved unless you pass over the body and blood of Jesus Christ. That is the truth of John chapter 10, verse 9. So he has the credentials. He possesses the credentials, church. He possesses the character. And finally, that's a little early to say finally, isn't it? Can I erase that? Strike that from the record. I'm not prepared to say finally yet. Thirdly, Jesus possesses the right concern. So he has the right credentials. He has the right character. But here is where we need to sit for a second. He has the right concern. The reason why we know he's concerned and he has the right concerns is because he's concerned about you and I. He's concerned about his children. He's concerned about the ones that he was sent here to love and to die for. Because here, there are people, and maybe you've met some of them, who are willing to be your friends. They're willing to hang out with you. They're willing to party with you. But when the times get tough, when the mistakes are made, they're like the cops showed up, right? I've never been a part of that, but I honestly haven't. I saw it on television. Or heard it from my sister. Not just kidding. That was funny. Stick to the script, Rico. Jesus possesses the right concern because he's concerned about you. And we know that there are people that aren't concerned about you. They look like they like you. They look like they're going to be with you through thick and thin, but they jet. They jet because they don't care about you. And so today I want you to know that you have a good shepherd. You have someone that came on this earth and he's concerned about you. He loves you. He knows you. It says that in verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He is the good shepherd. He's not the first among many. He's not even the best among most. He is the only good shepherd. He's the only one that is worth following and trusting in. He is good, not good in a moral or in a benevolent way. Oh, wow, that's a really good thing for you to do. No, he's good in an excellent quality way. He is without fault or blemish. He is the good shepherd. And here's the thing. As soon as the people would have heard him saying, I am the good shepherd, they would immediately thought of one person. Who would be that one person that the Old Testament people, the Jews, the Israelites, would remember as the good shepherd, the best shepherd they'd ever met or heard about? A guy named David. A guy named David. He was the greatest shepherd. I mean, there's all kinds of stories about him. And what Jesus is saying now is, listen, I know in chapter 5 I told you that Abraham wrote about me. And later in chapter 8, before Moses was, I am, Jesus said. But now in chapter 10, he's talking about David. And he's saying, listen, I am greater than David. Because I am the good shepherd who lays down his life. Here's the thing, church. This shepherd lays down voluntarily. He laid down his life voluntarily. Perfect volunteerism and self-giving devotion. And when you talk about perfect volunteerism and self-giving devotion, you cannot ignore the word love. Love is an unavoidable topic when we think upon Jesus' sacrifice. And I know I've told you so many times, but the cross on the floor at our church means that everyone has to come to the cross because Jesus Christ died for everyone. And if you wonder today, am I one of those sheep that this good shepherd lays down his life for? Absolutely. Absolutely. No one is outside of that today. It cannot be true love if and when we shrink back from the cup of suffering. That's exactly what Jesus didn't do. He knew that he had to drink that cup of suffering. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Church, that should make us all shout. Because he who had no sin became sin, that we might become that which we're not, righteous, right with God, right in living. And basically Jesus came to earth, the good shepherd came to earth because he was concerned about his sheep. And he became sin when he had no sin. He was that substitutionary death. And basically, there's a lot of really churchy words that explain that, and I'll skip all over those. But basically, the concept is this. That which we deserved, that which we were lined up to receive, he took for us. And so, church, because Jesus Christ came into our lives, because Jesus Christ came to this world, he took something and experienced something that you and I never have to experience. Because he went to the cross, there is something now you no longer ever have to worry about. Now, the one thing it's not is physical death. We all have to experience physical death because that's not why Jesus came. He didn't come to help us and prevent physical death. He came to prevent us from having to deal with spiritual death. And what that is separation from a God who loves us. Because of sin, because of the mess, because of the junk in our life, because of our forefathers and our ancestors, and a lady and a guy named Adam and Eve, we have a sinful nature. There is nothing we can do about it. But because of Jesus Christ, coming to this earth and then substituting for us and going through the death. Jesus didn't postpone or delay or even lessen in order for us to be able to manage our sinfulness better. He eliminated it today. And he proves his concern by how well he loves you and he knows you today. You know, one of the things that I don't have a real good pulse on, and I'm gonna be honest, I've been on this side of the fence for too long, and I need to get to know some more people that don't know Jesus. But I wonder how people think God thinks about them. You know, I don't know if you've ever been in a funeral that I've ever done, but if I'm doing a funeral, one of the things I always say, look at me giving away my secrets. I always feel like there's these people looking at me at this funeral, and sometimes I know the person, sometimes I don't, but probably like 8 out of 10 funerals I do, I say this to them. I say, God's not mad at you. Because I think that there's times and places in our life, like funerals, where life just stops. I mean, we're so busy and we run, but when you have a funeral, think about it. When a loved one dies, it's like you have to take off work, the day's kind of rearranged, and you're sitting here listening to this clown talk, like, what is he talking about? And so we try to be really practical in our funerals. And one of the things I always say is, God's not mad at you. He loves you. He knows you. And I feel like I want to say that today. Even if you've been in church your whole life, even if you've walked with God for many, many years, I want to remind you today that the Good Shepherd knows you. And that shouldn't be something that scares you. It should be something that encourages you. He knows your defects. He knows your peculiar traits. He knows your weaknesses. He knows your strengths and weaknesses. He knows your joys. He knows your burdens. He knows your mountains. He knows your valleys. He knows your victories. He knows your battles. And he still stands ready to help you in your times of need and lay down his life for you. Church, we're going to close here in just a moment. But I want to read the last 2 verses that I read earlier this morning. Verse 17 and 18 says this: the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life. So there's that volunteer self-devotion, volunteerism, that sacrifice, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have the authority to lay it down and the authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. Listen, I know that we're in the midst of a Christmas series, but Easter's written all over that passage. I want you to realize that Jesus Christ dying wasn't a tragic event. It was part of the plan. The resurrection must be part of the Christmas story. It must be part of your daily life. Because here's the thing, just because we have a good shepherd who has the credentials to follow, just because we have the good shepherd who has the character to believe in, just because we have a good shepherd who's concerned about us, you have credentials, you have character, you have concern, but can you really get the job done, Jesus? And what these verses are saying, listen, it might look like we're losing because I'm laying down my life, but I want you to know today, I lay it down because I have the authority to lay it down, and I pick it back up because I have the authority to pick it back up, and there's nothing in your life that I don't have the authority to lay down and to pick back up. There's nothing in your life that I don't have the authority to kill, but there's also nothing in your life that I don't have the authority to resurrect. Because that's what I do. Because I'm the good shepherd. And so in the midst of a selfie world, we have a selfless Savior. We live in a selfie world. I'll show you some of mine. My daughter and I, we take swag pictures. Right? We live in a selfie world. We like to take pictures of ourselves. We have a Savior who is selfless. Selfless. I was going to ask for permission to continue and read a few scriptures, but my microphone's still working, so I'll keep talking. Hebrews 12:2. Trust me, we're almost done. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. The joy set before him. Church, he didn't do this begrudgingly. He did this on purpose. He had a joy set before him to do this. He realized why he came. The joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the Father. Listen, the only way you can sit down is if your work's done. Jesus sat down because the work had been done on the cross. Romans 5:7-8 says this, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his long love for us in this. What? While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't have to wait for you to sin. He didn't have to wait for you to be born. He didn't have to wait for you to show up. He went ahead ever before you showed up, and he said, I'm going to take care of it even before they show up. Jesus Christ, the Good Shepherd, has taken care of it for all of us, for all time. He's a good shepherd.
Yeah.